Welcome into another edition of Musketeer Report Live. It is March 18th, not necessarily the March Madness edition you may have wanted of the podcast, but it's what you're getting. Xavier's season is not over yet. They will take on Georgia in the first round of the NIT tomorrow. That's Tuesday night, 7 p.m. That game will be on ESPN. And I guess that's where we'll start the show. I said we'll talk to Paul Fritschner here in a little bit. We'll talk to the Georgia beat writer for 24/7 here in a little bit. But I think if you're asking me, should Xavier play in the NIT, given that the transfer portal is opening today? I think there are a few reasons that I see that it makes sense or why Xavier might want to play in the NIT. The first is, in my opinion, letting Quincy Oliveri continue this season is probably the most worthwhile reason for Xavier continuing to play. And you can point to other players and everyone deserves the chance, whatever. That's fine. You're probably right about that. But if we're being honest, the one that we all really felt for when the Big East tournament ended the way it did was Quincy Oliveri. I mean, that guy has just meant a lot to this fan base. He had a fantastic season. I think every Xavier fan wants the team every year to play in the NCAA tournament. But for him specifically, that's the reason that he transferred from the mid-major level, was to get that type of opportunity to play in the postseason. And I think most fans would have loved for him to have gotten that opportunity in the NCAA tournament. But the way that it worked out, pretty cool for him, because now he gets to go home, play in the state of Georgia, in Athens against Georgia. That's going to be a pretty cool moment. You saw his dad tweeting about it last night. We posted that on the message board. You saw him posting on Twitter that he was happy about it. So I think that's where I would start with the NIT. For that reason alone, it's pretty cool that Xavier's going to play this game in Georgia, because Quincy gets to play a game in front of what I would assume would be a lot of family and friends. The second reason, and I'd be curious in hearing the fan base's thoughts on this, how much you guys care about this or not, but I think it probably played into Xavier's decision when it came to do you want to or do you not want to play in the NIT? This is an opportunity for them to avoid a losing season. They're sitting at 16-17 right now. They've never lost a first round NIT game. They are perfect in those games. If they win 2 games in this tournament, they can at least finish 500. They do better. They have a winning season. So you would have the opportunity to avoid that first losing season in a couple of decades. And I think you can argue about how meaningful that is, how much that would matter, especially if you're playing in an extra tournament to get to that point. But I think it is something that some people will care about, and it at least plays into it a little bit from the Xavier side of things of why they would have made that decision. We have a couple of questions already coming in, and they're related to the NIT, so we'll go ahead and go there. Johnny Blade says, why do you think so many teams declined an NIT bid this year? I guess players want to get a jump on the portal, maybe, but I don't think I understand not wanting to play games. I see both sides of this. I get where people are coming from with your basketball players, your coaches. This is what you do. Both sides are now getting paid to do those things, whether it be the coaches have always been paid, but now also the players are getting the NIL money, so they're being paid to play as well. I get that side of it. But I would also say, for a lot of these teams that didn't make the NCAA tournament, that was the real goal. And they didn't hit that goal. And so now they're looking at what's next, and they're trying to improve for next year. And the way the current system has been set up, transfer portal opens the day after Selection Sunday. The transfer portal is the easiest opportunity for players to leverage whatever power that they have, which is becoming a free agent through the transfer portal, trying to get more NIL money, trying to get certain guarantees in terms of playing time or what position you might be. So I think that's where you start with the players. And then from the coach's standpoint too, they also have to think about how are they going to fix their roster and get back on track so they can keep their job earning millions of dollars. And so the current system is set up to de-emphasize a tournament like the NIT, or really any postseason tournament that isn't the NCAA tournament. So I kind of get that side of it too, to be quite honest. I don't have a big problem with the teams who opt out of it. Let's face it. The NCAA tournament is all that matters. The other tournaments do not matter. I mean, they're cute, they're fun, there's reasons to play at them, and I get that side of it, but it doesn't actually matter. So I don't really have a problem with the teams that are turning down those opportunities. Paula says those coaches are dumb. And all right, well, the other questions we'll get to later on as we get into those topics. But right now, we are going to bring in our guy, Paul Fritschner, to check in from the Cintas Center. He is actually at practice today, checking in. So we'll go to him right now. Paul, you are at the Cintas Center. Xavier is practicing currently before they leave to Athens later today, right? I assume they are headed out on a flight later this afternoon. Kind of give us the vibes around the Cintas Center, because I think people are kind of talking about what's should Xavier be playing in this thing? You know, are guys looking to enter the transfer portal? Are they more worried about their next move, or are they focused on the task at hand? And I was just talking about the opportunity for Quincy Oliveri. Seems like one he's very excited about. What are the general vibes around the Cintas Center today?
Yeah, I mean, look, nobody's happy that they aren't playing in the NCAA tournament, right? Everybody wants to play in the NCAA tournament, but the reality is they're not there, and they're playing in the NIT, and they're making the most of the situation. They're traveling down to Georgia later today. So they'll be down there. They'll play tomorrow night. Look, Rick, you and I both know the NIT is not the most ideal situation here, but like I said, they're not going to sit out. I was interested last week or the week before when we had kind of started to talk about, is the NIT a possibility? Is this something you guys would be interested in? And immediately the answer was, yeah, we're going to take the opportunity to play more basketball. Over the last 10 days or so, there was no doubt in my mind that Xavier was going to accept the bid if they were given one. And then last night, with all the Big East teams that were left out, you're thinking, are they even going to get a bid in? And then several teams decline. I don't think if all of those teams had accepted, Xavier would have been in the field, but because they didn't decline, here we are, then Xavier gets to play some more basketball. So Xavier will go on the road. If Wake Forest wins, Xavier will go on the road again. I don't think Xavier can play another. I guess if they played App State, if App State beat Wake Forest, that game could be here, I think. Yeah, I would say, just to answer your question, it's more basketball, and I don't think there's anything more than that. I don't really know, though. You may have a better idea than me. I don't anticipate players sitting out of the tournament. I don't see that happening. But I also, to answer the question that, last night on the Spaces, and everybody's getting asked a million times, the NIT is not hampering the transfer portal. And I'm sure you've talked about that already. I didn't hear your intro, so I don't want to repeat if you did. But just to reiterate from my perspective, like, this coaching staff is very organized. They're very on track. The NIT is not going to take away from anything that they're trying to accomplish in the portal. The one thing that I am a little interested in that I don't know the answer to is how the NIT will affect the portal with guys that, maybe, let's say, aren't sitting out but go and transfer anyway at the end of the season, and they were assuming that they might, a surprise transfer. I don't know how that would play out, but either way.
Meaning what? Someone who wasn't thinking about transfer, something may happen in the NIT that would lead them to transferring?
No. I'm saying like, we're sitting here right now on Monday, and let's say the coaching staff is expecting this player to come back next year, and they're handling the next week in the portal as if they're coming back next year, and then they find out, oh, I actually want to go into the portal. That maybe that is the drawback, but I don't even know. I haven't talked to them enough to know the dynamics of that. I truly don't think that the NIT is affecting next year's team. You can't convince me of that.
Yeah. I mean, I get that point of it, and I agree with you that I don't think it's like a major setback. These coaches have been multitasking their entire careers. Like this whole transfer portal starting the day of a day after Selection Sunday is a new concept. They've been used to coaching and recruiting throughout their entire season and all of that stuff. So it's not going to be impossible for them to navigate. At the same time, the point you just brought up is a worthwhile one. And it's why some teams are going to decline bids to the NIT. And I mentioned that, Paul, the NCAA has de-emphasized tournaments like this by opening the transfer portal the day after Selection Sunday. And so some teams are going to want to get their ducks in a row. They are going to want to know about the unknowns that are about to occur, which means players leaving that they may not know about, or other guys they may have an opportunity to get that because your roster may look a certain way when all these guys are still on it, but some of those guys may be leaving. They may not actually be here in 2 weeks. And so there may be another guy in the portal who looks at your team and says, Well, they don't have spots available for me. They have too many guys at my position. So there are reasons to decline the bid that are worthwhile, in my opinion. And that's what I was talking about. I see both sides of it. It's like, I don't think it's going to hamper Xavier necessarily, but I also understand the coaches who are like, we're just going to move on. I mean, this team isn't the same team we're playing with next year anyways. And I think that used to be one of the big advantages of the NIT was, hey, we're trying to play for something bigger towards next year. We're trying to grow this thing for next year. But with the way the transfer portal works now and teams are so fluid from year to year, I think it's hard to really build on something from an NIT run like Xavier did 2 years ago.
I fully agree on that. I think that run in 2022 was very different than what you see here in 2024, just in the sense of the potential roster turnover that we're going to have. I mean, this team is going to look so different in the 24-25 season as opposed to 22, where you knew that a lot of those guys were going to come back, or at least you thought that a lot of those guys were going to come back. And Tim's question here, does playing in the NIT give coaches one last opportunity to evaluate their teams for who will or will not be coming back next year, or are those decisions already made? The one way I would answer that question, Rick, I'll be very interested to see how they handle two people in the NIT, Lazar and Kachi. Yeah. I think those are my two guys that, and again, hopefully I'm not repeating anything you said in the beginning, but I think from where Lazar was 3 weeks ago, where I think a lot of fans had thought, oh, well, it's a foregone conclusion that he's transferring, he's gone, don't expect to see him on the team next year. Now, all of a sudden, you're 3 weeks past that. He's played 33 minutes in consecutive games. He's shown at least promise. I'm not going to say that he was the best player on the floor by any means, but he's at least shown some growth that you wish you would have seen earlier in the season. But now you go out there and you have one more opportunity against a Georgia team that, quite frankly, is not a good basketball team right now. Right now, at least. Like, they did not close the season strong. They were great in the beginning of the year, had a fantastic non-conference. They were horrific in January and February leading into March. Xavier probably should win this game tomorrow. So you get, maybe two opportunities at least to see Lazar and a guy like Kachi play again. Yeah, I think that is a major benefit to these two games, assuming they play.
From the coach's perspective, I would imagine they have a pretty good feel for what they want to happen going into the offseason. But I would tell you, I've talked to direct sources involved with different rosters, and Xavier's specifically, but also other teams. And I've had the same source give me completely conflicting information from 1 day to 2 days later on guys about whether they're going to be there next year or not, right? So, like, there are unknowns that are about to occur. And from a fan's perspective, if I'm just looking at it, knowing nothing other than what we've seen so far this year on the court, I don't know. I'm not even sure exactly how I feel about the Lazar Djokovic and Kachi Enze situation, where they fit in going forward, whether they should be back or not, how they fit into plans. So from a fan's perspective, I think it's worthwhile watching those two guys more. I think you hit the nail on the head with those two. I'm fascinated to watch those two and Trey Green.
Yeah, I think it's funny when we talked about, the Sean Miller situation a couple of weeks ago, and then you talk about, you're good. You talk about that a couple of weeks ago, and then you talk about, these guys in the transfer portal. It's just like, even though you're around the team and you're here all the day, all the time, every day and everything, you have no feel, you have no idea for where these guys are going to go or what they're going to do and what decisions are going to be made. It's just the reality of the situation. It changes every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Paul, we'll wrap it up with this. I'm about to bring in Jordan Hill from our Georgia site. But Johnny asked, would a run in the NIT impact anyone's decision to go or not go into the portal? I dropped out for a moment, so sorry if you already referenced that. We didn't really talk about this yet. But, Paul, I don't think it's really going to change anyone's mind. I mean, the only way you could maybe see that happening is if one of these young guys was maybe on the fence about whether or not they're coming back, has a great run in the NIT, and maybe that encourages them to feel good about the situation. But that's the only argument I could really see being made about.
Yeah, I agree. I honestly have nothing else to add to that, because I think you're spot on. The sample size here, I mean, Xavier could lose tomorrow. They could win the whole thing. You have no idea what you're going to get. I think guys' decisions are probably pretty much already made.
I would agree. All right, Paul, thanks so much for checking in from the Cintas Center. And are you making the trip to Athens?
I'm not. I will not be down there. I will be this weekend. I'll be with Marquette on behalf of the Big East. Okay. So I don't know what they're, like if Wake Forest wins, I don't know if they would go straight from there to Wake Forest. It's just the logistics there were a little much. So I'll be in Indianapolis this weekend with the Golden Eagles, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's the commitment. But obviously with this, I'll be watching.
All right, perfect. Well, Paul, thanks for checking in from the Cintas
Yep.
Center. Really appreciate it.
Yep. See ya.
All right, Paul Fritschner, always good stuff with Paul there. And next we are going to Jordan Hill from our Georgia 24/7 site. Jordan, thank you for checking in today. I know it's a busy day for you as we try to do this quick turnaround here. It's not like the NCAA tournament where you get to wait till Thursday to do your prep work and get your preview article written and everything. You got to do it here in 24 hours. So first of all, we'll just start with this Georgia season. You go through the non-conference, the team's winning games, they're playing pretty well. And even through the first, I would argue maybe, 4 or 5 games of the SEC play, things are still looking pretty good. I mean, the 2 losses are to Kentucky and another really good team. I can't even remember. Tennessee, I believe, at the time. Close game to Tennessee. What changed? What was the narrative? What was the story of this season? What changed at that point?
Well, I think the biggest thing, Rick, is just close but not close enough with some of these games. You look at the Tennessee game, they were up like 11 with maybe 6 minutes to go. They led Alabama through the entire first half and a good chunk of the second half, and Alabama came through. It's one of those situations with Georgia. This is Mike White's second season that, there was real progress made. I mean, you look at the games they played this year, really, other than Texas A&M, which was late in the season, and you could kind of feel like the season might have kind of gotten away from them a little bit. Senior night, they didn't play the way they wanted to. They wound up not scoring in like the last 6.5 minutes of that game. Other than that, in most of the SEC games they played this year, they were really competitive. I mean, they kept games close, and that wasn't something you saw a lot in year one. There were several blowouts along the way. So it's one of those things where on one side you say, yeah, there's been progress made. They've had freshmen step up, especially in these last few games to end the season and even in the SEC tournament. But, it didn't really translate to any big wins other than, they won at South Carolina early in the year. And I felt like that was sort of before we all knew what exactly South Carolina was going to be. We went into this season, I think at SEC Media Day, South Carolina was picked to finish last in the conference. So you thought, well, it's a nice win in Columbia, but, didn't really think a ton of it at the time. But no, it's a situation where I'm really fascinated with how this team shows up in the NIT. I think they're an improved team. It didn't really show up in the overall record, and they didn't really get, other than that South Carolina win, many marquee victories. But I think they see opportunity playing in this NIT, and I think they want to make the most of it.
So, we're talking about this. They lose 10 of 12 to end the regular season. And you said Mike White is just finishing up his second year here at Georgia. Last year, they go 16-16. What is the fan base's vibes towards Mike White at this point? Are they kind of the opinion that things are moving in the right direction? It just wasn't quite there this year. I see a lot of young guys to be excited about.
I think it's a lot of wait and see, and it's mostly just because of the portal era. And, I've written about it going back to that Texas A&M loss where, Mike really questioned the fight, which is something we haven't seen a lot with this team. But you see the pieces there. I mean, you've got your backcourt with Silas Demery Jr. and Blue Kane, and then you got Dylan James, who has probably been the brightest spot on this team in the last probably month of the season. But, it's the portal era, Rick. We don't know if these guys are coming back. So
sure.
I think there's reason to be excited. You want to see if Georgia's able to keep these guys because those are 3 guys who will just be sophomores next year. And they're adding a 5-star in Asa Newell, a guy that I think answers a lot of problems that this team had, especially at the 4. I think he's a guy that's going to step in and not only give you scoring, but plays really, really good defense, which they've just lacked for the better part of this season at that position. So I think that there's some sort of waiting and seeing. I think that they want to see how this staff handles this offseason. Again, the pieces are there, but we know in this era of basketball, it doesn't matter if you had promising young guys if they decide to go somewhere else. So I think the next few weeks and the months will give fans a better feel for which direction this program is trending. I think it's a very important offseason coming up for Mike White and his staff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Doesn't feel the same as it used to when you have a really promising freshman recruiting class come in. Before we get into some of the specifics about tomorrow night's matchup, How's the transfer portal impacting this week for you? I know on my end, there's all types of rumors circulating, even about some of the top players on the roster. I read your story. It seemed like the Georgia team is pretty much focused on the game at hand, and that's all they're talking about. But are there more rumors behind the scenes as far as the transfer portal goes?
Well, we've been hearing names about guys who might look at Georgia or who could become, candidates to transfer to Georgia. Rick, I'm sure that's the same there with you. It's sort of just wait and see mode. And again, based on just what I've heard and based even on last night, what we heard from Mike White and Noah Thomason, I think Georgia's going to be full go as far as the transfer portal goes. Really, the only question is forward Jabri Abdur-Rahim, who's been dealing with a foot injury for the last few weeks. But yeah, I'm sure just like you, I've got notifications. They probably popped up, probably 8 or 9 since I've popped on and started talking to you. It's just, again, sort of a wait and see mode. I've seen a few reports so far of guys that Georgia's already reached out to. And again, there's a few names just sort of watching to see if they do, in fact, enter the portal. But it's a crazy time of year. And, for us too, Rick, Georgia spring practice for football is going on right now. So there's never a dull moment. It's going to be really interesting Tuesday. We get to do go to some football interviews, may get to watch a little bit of practice and probably turn right around and go to Stegman Coliseum and get ready for this basketball game.
Yeah, fortunately for me, I'm not going to be breaking down any zone blitzes or anything like that anytime soon. So you brought him up. So let's get started with some of the personnel on this Georgia team. The big question on everyone's mind is Jabri Abdur-Rahim. How is the injury? I know you mentioned that he's day to day. Is there any other updates aside from that?
No, not really. And it's been sort of the same thing since the Ole Miss game. That was the second to last regular season game where it's just been, they've been kind of watching to see if he's been available. He made the trip to Auburn for the regular season finale, which makes you think, if there was no shot, then they wouldn't have taken him. And it was the same in Nashville for the SEC tournament, but he didn't play in any of those games. I'm sort of doubting that we're going to see Jabri. I do think that he's going to do everything he can, especially because he's an older guy. He's been at Georgia. This is his third year now. This is his first chance, or would be his first chance, to play in the postseason. So based on what I've heard, I'm not expecting him to play, but I do think he's a veteran guy. He's a guy that's been credited with being a really strong leader for this team, keeping this team together. I think he's going to do everything he can to play, but my expectation is we are not going to see Jabri on Tuesday night.
Now, you mentioned going forward, Georgia is hoping to solve problems at the forward position. And that is something that Xavier has really struggled with this year, too. So talk a little bit more about that. What type of issues have they been dealing with at that forward spot? It sounds like these two teams might be kind of meant for each other here in the postseason.
Yeah, you sort of see some of these matchups in the NIT, and you kind of think, well, maybe this is part of the reason these teams are in the NIT after all. But, they have seen progress, like I mentioned with Dylan James. He's a guy that's really emerged, a guy that really was not playing in conference play to start conference play this year. And then over the last month, got bigger and bigger, got a bigger and bigger role, played more and more minutes. And that has definitely been a strong improvement to see him develop, because you kind of had a revolving door with RJ Melendez, with Jalen DeLoach, and it really hurt Georgia in the last game it played. So sort of having that lack of a big man that they could rely on, especially coming off the bench. Russell Chiwa has been their center. He's been a really good 5 for these guys coming over from South Florida. He gets in foul trouble. I think he had like 2 fouls in about 2.5 minutes against Florida. And he winds up in foul trouble. Then Jalen DeLoach, who's that power forward, he winds up in foul trouble. Then Frank Anselm-Ebay, another guy that they had come off the bench, he winds up in foul trouble. And it really was a way that Florida attacked them. They found that vulnerability and said, we're going to just keep working it down low. These guys, they can't be all over us. They're going to wind up fouling out of this game. And I do think that, honestly, Georgia played Florida really, really well. And that was the third time Georgia's played them this season. And I think if those guys didn't wind up in foul trouble, they would have had a shot and wound up being a 5-point loss. So, yeah, I think the biggest thing is it's just been such an unstable position. I think it has helped having a guy like Dylan James come up and play some big minutes, but, he can't stay on the court the whole time. And I think they need some of these older guys who, initially came to Georgia hoping they were going to have starting roles, hoping they could have bigger roles. Didn't wind up happening. They need these guys to step up, especially if they want to make a run in this tournament.
Russell Chiwa, the 7-footer that you're talking about, transferred over from South Florida. When I watch him, he kind of sometimes has the look of a guy who does some really great things, like he'll make an agile finish and a nice touch, and you're like, wow, he has some real tools to build on here. But then you look and you realize like he's kind of at the end of his career already. So I don't think he's like a guy building on potential. A little bit inconsistent at times with the moves he'll make in the post, but the way they use him, they will make you guard him a little bit, right? I mean, like they'll throw the ball into him one-on-one in the post and let him go to work at times.
And I think you've seen that a little bit more. And I think they sort of realized maybe that should have been a point of attack earlier in the season. But you saw that a little bit more when Jabri Abdul-Rahim went out of the lineup. And Jabri, if you look at this team and some of their stronger games, they're at their most dangerous when they're hitting from 3-point range. And that's Jabri's bread and butter. I mean, that's the best thing he does is when he's really settled in as a 3-point shooter, he can really get the entire team going. But yeah, Chi was a guy that you look at some of the stats and, there are games where he just straight up dominates. I think about the SEC opener against Missouri at Missouri, has a double-double, and I think he was the difference in Georgia winning and losing that game. And then there's some games like that Tennessee game we talked about earlier where they were very much in the mix, and he was just a non-factor. And I think he's a guy, when you're that big at 7 foot, you want to see that guy. If he's not scoring double-digit points, at least keeping possessions alive, open up opportunities for his teammates. I will give him this. He's been a really nice passer in these last few games. I mean, he's been logging several assists, which you don't see a ton for that 5 spot. But, yeah, when they get him going, he's a really dangerous guy. And he's somebody that, and I don't think this is uncommon for big men, if he misses a few shots early, you can kind of see him battling that. So pay attention to how he starts this game. If he's working really well down low, I think it'll give him confidence and will go a long way in what Georgia wants to do when it has the ball.
Yeah, I started with those front court players because I know that's the focus of Xavier fans. That's the big concern. They've struggled to defend the post so much this year. That's always kind of like, well, what does the opponent's front court look like first and foremost? So we started there, and maybe I buried the lead a little bit because the guy that I want to ask you about, who I've watched throughout this year, the transfer from Niagara, Noah Thomason, and he is a guy that when I watch him, I don't understand why he doesn't average more than 12 points per game. So explain this to me, because he's athletic, he's tough, he's strong, he's aggressive when he comes off ball screens and drives to the rim. He finishes well. He's not he's not a great 3-point shooter, but he hits a lot of step back, tough 3-point shots. Like, how would you assess his game and what's kind of limited him? Why is he not averaging like 15 to 20 points per game?
I think the biggest thing, and he's a guy, when he committed to Georgia, watching his film from Niagara, I said, I think he could be Georgia's leading scorer. And I'm not sure where he is exactly right now. Him and Jabri had kind of traded.
He's the leader right now by 1/10 of a point. Yeah.
Right. I knew it was close. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy that has sometimes just struggled with the inconsistency. I mean, I think the thing that I like the most about Noah's game, especially when it's hitting, he's got a nice jumper. And it feels like he can really, if he gets settled in, sort of like I was just saying with Chiwa, if he hits some of those early on, you can very noticeably see that confidence build in him. And there are some nights where just those early shots don't fall, and it feels like it's sort of a struggle. And when you look at this team on the whole, we talk about those close calls against teams like Tennessee and Alabama. It just felt like in some of those late minutes, everyone on the team was sort of looking around like, okay, who are we going to? We're going to count on this guy, and he's going to score, 4 or 5 points in these last 4 minutes. We're going to win this game. I feel like Noah Thomason was the best positioned Georgia player to be able to do that, but he just hasn't been able to. And I think that that's a struggle. And it's not really just on Noah. I don't think this team has one guy that they can rely on and say, we can count on this guy to get a bucket. So Noah's really dangerous. I think he's done a really good job this year, and he's come through in some big moments. But I think that, you want to see that shooting guard maybe come through and be that guy, especially with what he has around him. He's had his moments, but I think sometimes, he's not been that answer that you would want and say, we can count on this guy in these final minutes of a game.
Now, I was just wondering if it was something like that, because it feels like every time I turn on a Georgia game, I see him, I'm like, hey, he seems like a tough guy to handle. He's coming off ball screens. He's so physical when he drives. He kind of he's almost like a little James Harden-esque, the way he'll kind of use a forearm shove to get a defender off of him and then finish over top of him from about 5 or 6 feet, or even getting all the way to the rim. 6'4", 210 pounds. I think back to like the Delaware game that Xavier lost in the non-conference. They had a guard by the name of Jalen Trent, who was like 6'4", 205 pounds. he wasn't as good of a shooter as Thomason, but he drove to the rim constantly, and Xavier really struggled to stop him. So from a Georgia perspective, fans are looking for a guy that might be able to go off against the Musketeers. That's the guy I really have my eye on, the guy I would be worried about from the Xavier perspective. And I'll ask you about one more guard. Justin Hill seems like a guy that has had a few big games recently. I know his numbers aren't eye-popping, but scored 13 points and 17 points in the 2 SEC tournament games. Is he a guy that you feel like is catching fire at the right time, or are those just aberrations or game plan, scouting report, matchup type things?
No, I think he's sort of figured it out, and sort of going back to the point I was just making of like, who is this guy we can count on? Give Justin Hill credit. He's never really hesitated to say, look, I'll go downhill and try to get you some points. It's worked sometimes, and sometimes it's blown up and not going in Georgia's favor. But he's a really confident guy. I mean, earlier in non-conference play, Georgia got down 16 at Florida State, and they willed their way back. And Justin Hill hits the game winner in the final seconds. And even going to last season, they had a really close game in Athens on Valentine's Day against LSU. And Justin Hill hits the go-ahead, or I think the game winner in the final seconds. So he's a really confident guy. I think sometimes his problem is sort of understanding what's in front of him. You know, he's usually the first guy off the bench, and he's the point guard behind Silas Demery. He's a guy that just sometimes just has careless turnovers, doesn't sometimes, misses that defender when he's trying to make a pass, and all of a sudden you're trying to get back in transition and get a stop. But he's a dangerous guy, and I can guarantee you if this game is close, I would feel pretty confident Mike White would have Justin Hill out there because, sometimes it's hit or miss, but he's a guy that's not going to be afraid to take a shot, and he's come through and helped Georgia in some big moments.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it before I asked that question, but he's a 6 foot, 185-pound guard. So keep an eye on him as well. Potential scorer to keep an eye on in that backcourt. All right, Jordan, great stuff. Is there anything I missed? Is there any storylines or any players that I should have asked you about that I'm not here?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the biggest thing, again, from the Georgia perspective is seeing if Jabri's able to go. Again, I don't expect him to, and how that sort of changes Georgia's game plan. I mean, I think that they've found some success, even in that SEC tournament, of really relying on its three-point shooting. And we'll see if they do that. I mean, it would probably be Noah Thomason and Blue Kane, who's another freshman, probably leading the way from three-point range. But no, I'm just excited to see this game get underway. This is the first time Georgia's played in the postseason at all since 2017. So I do think that this means something for the fans and for the program, and they're going to see if they can make something out of it.
Awesome. Well, that's Jordan Hill from our Georgia 24/7 site, Dogs 24/7. Love the background there, by the way. It looks excellent on camera. Thank you for your help today. I really appreciate you checking in.
All right. Thanks, Rick.
All right. So that was Jordan Hill. Hopefully that was enlightening about this Georgia team. I don't know if you guys care about matchup preview interviews like that or not, but I figured he does a really good job covering the team, so it was worth bringing him in. So let's wrap up the conversation about NIT, NCAA tournament, March Madness, all that type of stuff. I think Paul and I pretty much hit on all of the Xavier-related topics. As far as the draw in the NIT, all of these teams, when it comes down to, is who cares the most, who wants to be there the most. And I think Xavier is probably like middle of the road in that regard. I think Quincy Oliveri, who's their best player, is excited to play. So they have a decent chance. And certainly the teams that they're going to be playing against aren't impressive. They have plenty of flaws of their own. In terms of the Big East, only getting 3 teams in the NCAA tournament, when I watch the Big East all year, I feel like that's a conference with more than 3 NCAA tournament teams in it. When I go through all the resumes, I'll be honest, I have a hard time getting really worked up about bubble teams not making the NCAA tournament. Like, should Seton Hall probably have been in there? Did they win a lot of quad 1 games? Was that part of it impressive? Definitely. I can make that argument. I'm definitely pissed off about Virginia being in the field. I don't understand how they're in at all, but that's the only real team I'm going to get worked up about. Any other argument to me is just kind of splitting hairs, and it's the same type of thing we do every year. I get the wringing of hands over Big East only getting 3 teams in and what that means going forward for the future. I think it's an aberration. I don't think it's something to be too worried about long-term. I think it was kind of a soft year in the middle of the Big East. I mean, think about it. The Xavier team was not great. They went to Providence and won by 20. I went to Seton Hall and won by 18 or 20, whatever it was. Like the Xavier team beat up a little bit on the middle of the Big East at times, and I don't think the Xavier team was an NCAA tournament team. So I guess looking back, as much as it feels like this conference is so great and it's so difficult at times, maybe it was only like a 3 or 4 NCAA tournament team type of year in the Big East. Maybe that's really what it was. I don't know. I just have a hard time getting too worked up about it. All right. Let's move on to some transfer portal talk, shall we? Transfer portal is open. It opened officially on Monday, today. I guess the questions you guys probably have is what to expect in terms of players leaving Xavier. I would put the over-under. We talked about this at musketeerreport.com on the message board. Definitely check that out. Lots of transfer portal talk going on right now. I would put the over-under 5. That's what I have it at right now. It feels like that number keeps creeping up higher. Started at 4.5. I've got it at 5, meaning somewhere between 4 and 6 right now is probably the right answer. If you want to tell me it's a little higher than that, I probably don't have a big argument against that. I think it's a very fluid situation in terms of Xavier's roster. I'm expecting a handful of guys to leave at least. I think there's a couple names that are pretty obvious that you guys can guess on your own. I do think there are going to be surprises, though. The big name that we're all talking about, if you're on social media, if you're on the message board, you've seen the reports coming out from Trilly Donovan, and there have been some other people now. I know everyone's tracking who Joe Tipton follows on Instagram, because that seems to result in that person then entering the transfer portal. Desmond Claude, there are a lot of rumors out there, and there are reports out there. So those are legitimate. I've heard the same things. I would also add to it that it's not a done deal. I don't think it means he's gone to another school just yet. But I think not just with Desmond Claude, but with all of these players, one thing we have to realize is that the way the system is set up now, the power and leverage that the players have is to enter the transfer portal, become a free agent essentially, and then negotiate for more money, more playing time, the position you want, what have you. That's really the only cards they hold in all of this. So I know people want to get really upset with the players when this stuff comes up or when they decide to do these things, but this is the way the system is set up for them. It's the only option they really have if they want to kind of improve their situation. So I get it's not always fun for fans, but I would be a little hesitant to crush these guys too much. You know, I mean, like it's going to be pretty common, I think, going forward in terms of guys entering the portal, seeing what's out there. Maybe they leave, maybe they don't, but it is the way they're going to be able to negotiate and leverage. And that's what this has come to. I mean, it's a business at this point. It is for everyone. It's been for the coaches this whole time. Now it's also a business for the players. In terms of how many Xavier will add, I think we've already heard from Sean Miller. 3 to 4 is what he has said in his radio show. I think there's a possibility you might see even more than that. We saw last year played out. I don't think they ever expected to have to keep going into the international market to go get new freshmen and everything at the end of the year like they did because of those end of season ending issues they had with Jerome Hunter and Zach Fremantle in the summer. I don't expect something like that to happen again, but unforeseen things happen this time of year. And that'll be the case again this year. So I'd put that number at 3 to 4 new additions, but don't be surprised at all if it's more than that for Xavier. I think 4 to 5 is certainly possible. In terms of what they're going to prioritize, we don't have actual names yet. I mean, there are maybe a few that are starting to trickle out that you're hearing Xavier's name involved with. We'll have those on the message board as well. But in terms of what they're going to prioritize, I think first and foremost, you have to get front court help. And I don't think it necessarily has to be either position, but I think you have to have a starting caliber player for one of the two positions. Meaning, if you get a starting forward who's a big time player, great. Then I think you feel okay about that with Zach at the center and a forward to go with them. Or if you can get a starting center, same situation, right? Zach's probably better suited to play the 4 anyway. You feel pretty good about that situation, assuming Zach is back. But you have to get a starting level front court piece, bare minimum. I think that's where it starts for Xavier. Then after that, Quincy Oliveri is going to be leaving, and you were already short on shooting this year. So adding shooting is an absolute must. Obviously, with Quincy leaving, that would make sense to add shooting on the wing. But adding shooting across the board, in my opinion, is a huge need for this team. So that's where I start with the transfer portal is front court starter, shooting, likely on the wing. And then from there, I think you can go some best available. I think you'll have to figure out what's going on with the point guard situation. Is Davion McKnight and Trey Green both back? Are you going to have 2 6-foot guards again this year, or does that get changed up? Do you need to find more size for one of those positions? Something like that. So that's probably where my mind goes after finding a starter in the front court and finding 3-point shooting help. What questions do you guys have? I'm ready for your guys' questions. What is a top 10 player in the portal worth? Curious how far $3 million can go. It's a good question. I would tell you that I think most of the top players in last year's portal made somewhere between 200 and 400,000. Now, are there players who made more than that? Are there the Hunter Dickinson stories out there? Absolutely. So when you say top 10 player, I don't know exactly where that, like, as Richard Skinner would say, the line of demarcation is for where the crazy deals get cut off at. And some of those are just like situation dependent, right? You might be going to a school that happens to have a crazy NIL situation, and maybe you get more than someone else does, and you're the same type of player. But I would say there's probably only a handful of those types of guys. So the back end of that top 10, that's where I think we're probably getting into that under $400,000. Maybe this year we'll see a bump, but last year that's kind of where it was. 200 to 400,000 ish is what I heard for most of the top type of players. Only one incoming freshman, right? That's correct, Jimmy. They have one incoming freshman. That is Jonathan Powell from Centerville High School. He's a 6'6" wing. He can shoot it from the outside. So he's a guy that's going to help with that long term. But I always worry about relying too much on freshmen, especially when you're saying you're going to be relying on freshmen for 3-point shooting. Because it seems like even the really good ones, I know we all remember Miles Davis's freshman year. Miles Davis is a fantastic 3-point shooter, but he had that incredible slump. I'm pretty sure that was his freshman year, not his sophomore year, but had that incredible slump where he went through. But that happens to freshman players. They either hit a wall, or they start slow, or they just have a rough patch. I don't want to be relying on a freshman for all of my 3-point shooting, or for being my big upgrade in 3-point shooting, or to replace Quincy Oliveri for all my 3-point shooting. So Jonathan Powell, a great addition as a freshman. He is the only recruit for next year. But like I said, I think you can't rely on him for all your shooting on the wing. Looking through some of these questions. If you've got any other transfer portal questions you feel like is a good one, feel free to submit that. This is actually an interesting one. Mark says, how often last year did a high-profile player like Dez put his name in the portal and then decide to return to a school? I see this as an effective way to see what NIL dollars are available and see. I don't think this happened a lot last year, to be quite honest. But I don't think that means it's not going to happen going forward. I think we're just kind of scratching the surface of this new NIL market and how everyone is going to use it. And I think what players are realizing, especially as they're getting more help from advisors and agents, and all of those relationships are becoming legal and you're allowed to develop those types of situations. I think what we're going to see is more players being savvy about this. And even if they're staying at the school they're at, they're going to pull out and they're going to hold you hostage a little bit. And they're going to be like, well, I might be back, but a little bit more money could sweeten the deal. Or, like a guy like Dez, what What, are you going to guarantee him more playing time? He's already playing as much as you can possibly play him. So I can't imagine there's a lot in terms of the list of demands. But even if there are no more demands, like you said, you're still going to step out there and see what else is out there for me. Maybe you're paying me, and again, this is not specific to Des, but let's just make this for anybody. You're getting paid $100,000 just to make it a nice round number. Well, you had a really good year, averaged more points than you did the season before when you made $100,000. The team you're going back to says, yeah, you're getting $100,000 again. Why wouldn't you put your name in the portal and say, how much is out there for me elsewhere? Oh, wait, this team wants to offer me $250,000. Do you guys have a different opinion now, or should I go take the 250? Right? Like, I mean, this is pretty basic negotiation stuff. I don't think it's anything crazy. I don't think it makes anyone a bad person. I don't think it means they're not committed to what they're doing here. It's just the reality of the situation now. And so I think that is going to continue to happen more and more. But to your question, Mark, I think that does mean we will see more players enter the portal and then return to the team that they were already on. Yeah, that was the second part of Mark's question there, basically saying what I said, which I agree with. Chris says, with Miller's name being thrown around for other coaching ops, do you see that hurting us significantly with portal players? No, I don't. I mean, the biggest name or job that Sean's name came up for was the Ohio State job. And that was the most concerning one, at least so far. And I don't know how many more jobs would open up this year that would be more concerning for a Xavier head coach and Sean Miller specifically than Ohio State. So now that they've moved on, they've already hired their coach, I think, and it's before the portal even opened. I don't think it's really going to hurt Xavier much at all. In fact, I think they're probably moving forward in more of a position of strength now than they were maybe a month ago when those rumors were starting to pop up, because it's kind of been put to bed. It didn't really gain a whole lot of traction nationally. It seemed like Sean was pretty set to come back to Xavier. So I don't think that's going to hurt Xavier at all this year. If a player enters the portal, do you know if Sean closes the door behind him, meaning once you declare you're gone, or what? I don't even know like what you guys are talking about when you say that stuff. I get that's like a hardo thing to say, like, yeah, we're not going to allow him back, but why? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. You're not going to let, if Desmond Claude were to enter the transfer portal, you wouldn't want him back anymore? Why? You're going to get better than Desmond Claude out there? I doubt it. No, I don't get that at all. No, I don't think they'll do that. Do you think the coaching support staff will change at all for the 2024-25 season? It's possible. I think Adam Cohen's name is coming up for some open jobs, and it's about that time in his career. He is associate head coach type of guy that's going to come up in a lot of those mid-major, low-major type openings for head coaching positions. So I think Adam Cohen, there's a possibility that someone may hire him away as a head coach. As far as Dante and David right now, I don't think that they'll be looking to leave, but you never know. I mean, you never know. It just seems like Dante being in such a good spot at Xavier, his alma mater, a place he loves. And with David, Sean brought him here. He came here for a reason. I would assume he's pretty excited about building this thing with Sean, but you never know. I certainly don't think Xavier's paying like top dollar for the assistants right now. So it's possible someone comes in with a big deal and steals one of those guys away. But for the time being, I haven't heard any farther rumblings about needing to be concerned about those guys. Mark says, do you think someone will sue the NCAA at some point to have more than 4 years of eligibility? Not everyone wants to go overseas for the money, so why not stay in college? Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like you're saying, they exhaust their eligibility, they play if they're 4, they go through their 5 years if they did a redshirt or something, and then they figure out a reason why they should be in college for one more year. It's possible. I could definitely see that happening with what we've seen recently. And yeah, I definitely think there are guys that are going to want to continue to play that. That's the one thing that's going to be good for the college game is you're going to see good players stick around longer than ever. I mean, why would you want to, if you're a tweener guy who's not a pro, but you're a great college player, and Xavier's had a lot of those guys. It felt like for about a 10-year period there, we were in a mode of, if you're decent, even if you're not an NBA guy, you're looking to leave and go professional as soon as possible, even after your sophomore year, maybe, because, well, you want to start the earning potential right away. You want to get that your clock's already ticking. You want to get those checks coming in. So you'll go overseas and try to make your 75,000 or 150,000, whatever level player you are. Now you can just stay in college and get that money, and it's hassle free. You don't have to fight with some weird club owner who doesn't speak your language and may not actually pay your check on time or at all. And I mean, like it's just a lot easier of a situation to stay in college and earn that money through NIL. So I absolutely think you're going to see guys stay in college longer, better players stay in college longer. And at some point, Mark, you're probably right. There will probably be someone who tries to find a loophole and tries to find a reason to stay in college for an extra year, even through legal matters. All right. I think that's good for the questions. I don't see any more good ones in there. So thank you guys for tuning in to another Musketeer Report Live. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing from Paul Fritschner and Jordan Hill, our Georgia 24/7 writer. We'll be checking in a lot during the transfer portal, doing these live shows, answering some of your questions, talking about the different news. There's not a lot out there in terms of actual news, transfer portal related stuff. I know we've had a lot of questions on the transfer portal thread on Musketeer Report over the last few days, things like, or over the last 24 hours, I guess it really just started last night. So things like the NIL money that Xavier's had the last year or so, how much they expect to have going forward this year, how many guys we expect to see leave, all those types of things we've been talking about there inside that thread. So go ahead. If you have more questions, you want to get a little bit more insight, we can talk a little bit more freely behind a paid message board than we can on these free podcasts like this. So, please check out musketeerreport.com. It is 50% off right now. So if you sign up, it's less than $5 to get your subscription going, and you'll enjoy all that transfer portal information. So that does it, I think. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.